Leeds Trams. There was a point during the Second World War when my father took up the double bass. To recall the trams of my boyhood is to be reminded particularly of that time. Dad is a smoker, so he troop upstairs rather than going inside. The word a reminder of the time when upstairs was also outside. On some trams in 1942 it still is, because in these early years of the war a few open-ended trams have been brought back into service. We wedge ourselves in the front corner to be exposed to the wind and weather, an unexpected treat, and also an antidote to the travel sickness from which both my brother and I suffer, though I realise now that this must have been due as much to all the smoking that went on as to the motion of the tram itself. Neither of us ever actually is sick, but it's not uncommon, and somewhere on the tram is a bin of sand just in case. So the four of us, Mam, Dad, my brother and me, are ensconced on the tram sailing down Tong Road into town, or if we are going to see Grandma, who lives in the Gilpins, we will get off halfway at 14th Avenue. Around 1942, though, we come into the double bass period, when some of our tram journeys become fraught with embarrassment. Dad is a good amateur violinist, largely self-taught, so taking up the double bass isn't such a big step. He practices in the front room, which is never used for anything else, and, I suppose because the bass never has the tune, it sounds terrible. He sounds as if he's soaring, which he also does actually, as one of his other hobbies is fretwork. Though the instrument is large, the repertoire is small, except in one area, swing. Until now, Dad has never had much time for swing, or popular music generally. His idea of a good time is to turn on the home service and play along with the hymns on Sunday half hour, or, more tentatively, with the light classics that are the staple of Albert Sandler and his Palm Court Orchestra. But now with Dad in the grip of this new craze, Mam, my brother and I are made to gather round the wireless, tuned these days to the light programme, so that we can listen to dance band music. Listen, Mam, do you hear the beat? That's the bass. That'll be me. Dad has joined a part-time dance band. Even at 8 years old I know that this is not a very good idea, and just another of his crazes. The fretwork, the homemade beer. Schemes Dad has thought up to make a bit of money. So now we are walking up Moorfield Road to get the tram again, only this time to go and watch Dad play in his band somewhere in Wortley, and our carefree family of four has been joined by a fifth, a huge and threatening cuckoo, the double bass. Knowing what is to happen, the family make no attempt to go upstairs, but scuttle inside while Dad begins to negotiate with the conductor. The conductor spends a lot of his time in the little cubbyhole under the winding metal stairs. There's often a radiator here that he perches on, and it's also where the bell pull hangs, in those days untouchable by passengers, though it's often no fancier than a knotted leather thong. In his cubbyhole the conductor keeps a tin box with his spare tickets, and other impedimenta which at the end of the journey he will carry down to the other end of the tram. The niche that protects the conductor from the passengers is also just about big enough to protect the double bass. But when Dad suggests this, there is invariably an argument, which he never wins, the clincher generally coming when the conductor points out that, strictly speaking, that thing isn't allowed on the tram at all. So while we sit inside and pretend he isn't with us, Dad stands on the platform grasping the bass by the neck, as if he's about to give a solo. He gets in the way of the conductor, he gets in the way of the people getting on and off, and, always a mild man, it must have been more embarrassing for him than it ever was for us. Happily, this dance band phase, like the fretwork and the herb beer, doesn't last long. He gets bored with the fretwork, the herb beer regularly explodes in the larder, and the double bass is eventually advertised in the miscellaneous column of the Evening Post, and we can go back to sitting on the top deck again. After the war we moved to far Headingley, where Dad, having worked all his life for the Co-op, now has a shop of his own just below the tram sheds opposite St Chad's. We live over the shop, so I sleep and wake to the sound of trams. Trams getting up speed for the hill before Westwood Lane, trams spinning down from West Park, trams shunted around in the sheds in the middle of the night, the scraping of wheels, the clanging of the bell. It's not just the passage of time that makes me invest the trams of those days with such pleasure. To be on a tram sailing down Headingley Lane on a fine evening lifted the heart at the time just as it does in memory. I went to school by tram, the fare a halfpenny from St Chad's to the Ring Road. A group of us at the modern school scorned school dinners and came home for lunch, catching the tram from another terminus at West Park. We were all keen on music and went every Saturday to hear the Yorkshire Symphony Orchestra in the town hall, and it was on a tram at West Park that another sixth former, Fanny Fielder, sang to me the opening bars of Brahms' second piano concerto, which I'd never heard, and which the YSO was playing that coming Saturday. Trams came into that too, because after the concert many of the musicians went home by tram, though none with a double bass. Sitting there rather shabby and ordinary, and often with tab ends in their mouths, worlds away from the Delius, Walton and Brahms which they had been playing. It was a first lesson to me that art doesn't have much to do with appearances, and that ordinary middle-aged men in raincoats can be instruments of the sublime. Odd details about trams come back to me now, like the slatted platforms, brown with dust, that were slung underneath either end, like some urban cow-catcher, or the little niche in the glass of the window on the seat facing the top of the stairs, so that you could slide it open and hang out. And how convivial trams were, the seats reversible, so that if you chose you could make up a four whenever you wanted. As a child, I had difficulty in understanding that the turning motion the driver made with the handle was what drove the tram, it seeming more like mixing than driving. And then there was the imposing demeanour of the ticket inspectors, invested with a spurious grandeur on a par with the one-armed man who showed you to your seat in Schofield's Cafe, or the manager of the Cottage Road Cinema in his dinner jacket, or gents outfitters in general. I don't recall anyone ever collecting tram numbers, but the route numbers had a certain mystique, the even numbers slightly superior to the odd, which tended to belong to trams going to Gipton, Hare Hills or Belle Isle, parts of Leeds where I'd never ventured, and Kirkstall will always be 4, just as Lawnswood is 1. Buses have never inspired the same affection, too comfortable and cushioned to have a moral dimension. Trams were bare and bony, transport reduced to its basic elements, and they had a song to sing, which buses never did. I was away at university when they started to phase them out. Leeds, as always, in too much of a hurry to get to the future, and so doing the wrong thing. I knew at the time that it was a mistake, just as beaching was a mistake, and that life was starting to get nastier. If trams ever come back, though, they should come back not as curiosities, nor, God help us, as part of the heritage, but as a cheap and sensible way of getting from point A to point B, and with a bit of poetry thrown in.